I've got my two entrepreneurs here, and I'm going to ask them some questions about their life and what they've done with their businesses shortly. But by way of premise, I thought I'd start by just talking about how nurses, in the years that I've been a nurse manager, have carried the burden of a fairly consistent problem as they move through their clinical environments. And it's usually in the acute care sector, but it's also in the community, the primary sector, and in the home care environments as well. And when I'm the nurse manager and an after-hours coordinator, and I've asked nurses about what their problems are, they carry the weight of workload. And they're always talking about how much stress and anxiety that causes them. And I don't think that that problem is going away. And there's lots of ways of dealing with that problem. But nurses tend to carry it with as the weight of the world. And they often say to me, it's my registration week. They're always saying that when they have a greater workload that builds, it seems like builds every single day, they're getting more patients, that they're sicker, as we move on in this journey onto an environment in our health system that's got sicker patients that are older and they've got greater comorbidities, our workload seems to get greater. Years ago in our healthcare sector, when we had shining beacons of acute care hospitals, and we had young people who had single diseases like pneumonia and appendectomies, and they stayed in hospitals for 7 days, and they're in large nightingale wards. And that was a relatively easy thing to deal with compared to what we deal with now. But it's our sick patients that are demented, and they've got comorbidities, obesity, diabetes, and they're generally unwell, and they're tucked away in private rooms, then that workload and managing that seems to be greater. And I think there's a way in which nurses tend to deal with that in a certain way. So that's why these guys are here to join me today, because entrepreneurs have a tendency to deal with things in a different sort of way. So I think most people who are nurses would identify with the group that we might call the career employee or the career professional. And so those characteristics of that person is that they're generally independent and they're self-reliant. They're consistent, they're often task-orientated or they're project-orientated. They're great problem solvers, and nurses are amazing problem solvers in that they're able to do great workarounds. Their compensation is often linked to, is rarely linked to their performance. They focus on the question and the answer. They often operate in a vacuum, and with career employees and professionals, they're rarely able to say no. So they recognise that it's a problem, but they keep taking on that workload because they feel that burden of responsibility and the onus to do that. They're often very successful, but they're often quite unfulfilled. They're overworked and often overinvested, and they find the operational aspects of the business or the health facility fairly overwhelming. And sometimes they're quite bored by what they're doing and how they're doing it. Entrepreneurs, however, have a few characteristics that are quite different. They never accept no for an answer. When they are told no, they often work harder to prove them wrong, and it's almost like they often need to prove something that it can happen. They thrive on the uncertainty, which is not something that the career employee or the professional has a lot of comfort in. They take the responsibility of carrying on everything on their shoulders, and they often wouldn't have it any other way. They're resourceful and they're persuasive, and they have a big picture and sometimes not so much of the detail. You may or may not agree with that. They're curious, they've often got loads of questions, and they look at all of the possibilities. They're generally visionaries, they're flexible to the point of being incredibly agile, and sometimes they can border on being a little bit random. They have loads of ideas, and they feel impatience with those around them that want to do it in the same way all the time. And they often work many, many hours and are frustrated by the administrative side of the business. So in a way, we've got career employees that are nurses that are taking on the burden, that they're not saying no, and they're just working around the problem. They're owning the problem, and they're just carrying it, as opposed to entrepreneurs who tend to think about it in a different way. And they don't often think about workload in that language. In fact, the way in which they language it is often really different. So where we might say our workload is heavy, and an entrepreneur would talk about it about the reaching their capacity, and that they've got capacity constraint as opposed to a workload issue. So I'll introduce our panel members. I'll start with Linda. Linda did a nursing training at the Royal Brisbane in the 80s and worked as an RN in a variety of roles across New South Wales and in Queensland for 15 years. She went back to tertiary education, and after that her career took a diversion and she went into the corporate world, into human resources and business management roles. In 2009 she started an MBA, and after she finished that in 2010 decided that she would combine everything that she learned in the corporate world and everything that she knew in the nursing world. And her own company, Your Home Care, was born about 5 years ago. Your Home Care is a company that provides personalised support to children and adults with complex disability and mental health needs to enable them to live a quality of life in their home and in their environment. Your Home Care employs personal carers right through to registered nurses by providing continuity of care so as their needs change. Since establishing the company 5 years ago, Linda has managed incredible growth in her business, Your Home Care, and the services delivered range from Noosa right through to Brisbane, and it's expanding every single day. This is a massive need, and you probably picked the change in our healthcare about 5 years ago when the government's struggling to catch up with it now. Tell me how you brought that about.
I had finished university, the MBA, and in the entrepreneurship subject, I had one of those inspirational lecturers that just flipped my thinking and just opened me up to what I want to do, basically. And so I started to research what my opportunities were if I wanted to combine my nursing and my business experience, so my work experience at that point. And my research just took me to community care, absolutely. Could read the writing on the wall with the age demographic, the increasing costs of hospital stays. It was just all there that you could see. I've worked in government before in some of those corporate roles, so I've worked in the inside. So I've got a bit of understanding of how budgets and the financial thinking operates in the government world sector. And so I just saw it as a huge opportunity. Spent 6 months researching it while I was working full time, so there was no leaping into it. And then I just decided to then take the step once I'd done enough research to be reassured that that there was going to be opportunity down the track.
And Marion. Marion is a clinical background of over 25 years. I just want to keep that secret. Around 25 years. She's worked in ICU, in CCU, general med surge, and agency and telehealth. Her management experience is that of being in senior executive positions, such as when she was the ADON of Education and Staff Development, with over 900 staff and then over 5 sites in 5 different hospitals, with both clinical and non-clinical staff education and staff development programs to be delivered. She was the Occupational Health and Safety Coordinator of part of her responsibilities. She worked with work cover, human resources, including industrial relations and enterprise bargaining, accreditation and policy development and review. Again, building on everything that she had known and built on that to date, she started her own business with TKT Education that now delivers an enormous amount of education throughout in Australia. A steep learning curve on how to survive in a world outside a hospital and a bureaucracy and all of the things that come with that. How did you come to start that?
Well, after spending many years in that box that you described, taking on everything that everybody gave me, which was evident there with what you just read, just more and more and more and more, finally hit the brick wall and thought, enough, it's time to do something else. And again, I didn't just dice it straight off. I started working with TKT Education for something like 4 years, so I was doing that role and building a client base before I thought, right, that's it, now's the time. And it was extremely difficult to extract myself from that little comfort zone where I had been institutionalised it's a different mindset, you know. And so, yeah, I needed preceptoring, I suppose, and I'm very fortunate that my business partner, who's my husband, has a business background. And I've got to say, without that support and encouragement, it would have been doubly different and difficult to do that. So it is a different mindset, and it takes a lot of courage to step outside of that supported environment, or you think well supported, but it really isn't, into something that is independent, and it's a bit risky.
Yeah.
It's a lot risky, but it's a lot of fun insofar as the freedom to have the resources is yours, whereas you had to go to somebody to beg for what you needed, and forever being constricted with, well, you can't have this lot of staff, you can't have this lot of money, and having to do the same and more with so much less, and how frustrating that was. Now being in control is a whole lot better, but there are other pressures, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, on resources and time and money.
So entrepreneurs are quite characteristic in that they have that ability to see change and a challenge as not a problem, like career employees and professionals obviously often do, but see that as an opportunity. Linda, can you tell us about a time when you had a similar situation where you saw a similar situation like workload, and how you see that not as a problem but as an opportunity?
Well, it's actually a change that's coming up in the near future, and that's the introduction of NDIS, so the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We've been providing care to people with disabilities and funded by disability services for about over 4 years. And the model of NDIS is the consumer-directed choice. So they, in theory, the clients, we call them, can choose who their service provider is, which is vastly different to the way it works at the moment. There's an element of choice, but it's not going to be as great. So to a lot of people, that would be a huge threat, because we're still quite young, being just over 5 years old. We don't have the same budget of marketing, exposure and branding that a lot of the big service providers have, but I see it as an enormous opportunity. So I'm confident in our service delivery, I'm confident in the quality of our service delivery, I'm confident that our staff are the quality that I need them to be to continue providing outstanding service to our clients, which so far has held us in good stead, and is why we're getting 1 or 2 new clients every week, and I'm not exaggerating. So if we continue, if we just don't get distracted, there's a lot of workload to be done in the background. You know that analogy of ducks paddling under the water. On the top you look so cool, and underneath there's a whole lot of effort going on. We are so often like that. It's like, we're cool girls, and on the other big under the water we're just paddling. We will be doing that for the next 12 months to prepare for the NDIS and to prepare our clients. But the opportunities there, I just think, are enormous. So you've got to trust yourself, and you've got to trust the people around you and the people who I still directly employ. So as the business has become bigger, that is not a role that I have outsourced, is the selection of the staff. I still do it. So I interview and I make the choice, because they are going to be an extension of my philosophy and my value, or our value collectively, to the client. So I very much want to influence that, and there's so much that you can read in a person when you're actually in front of them having a discussion. With their language and their responses to certain issues. So I do hold on to that, but I see the NDIS as a massive opportunity with a whole lot of work, but I find it extremely exciting.
Yeah. What about you, Marion, when there was a time when you had an influx of customers or opportunities and it was overwhelming?
Well, I've got one on the plate right now, actually. So one of our local nursing agencies has expressed a great level of dissatisfaction with the compulsory training, and data that's being provided by an online provider. And they've asked us to look at that and bring it into a more satisfactory state, where they can rely on the learning and the performance at the bedside. So we're in the process now of writing, and my husband's doing the IT side of it, and we've got a deadline. So the pressure's on.
Yeah.
But we said, okay, yes, we'll do this, and we'll deliver something that has some credibility out there in the workplace where it's meant to be. So often we see people with certificates of this and that, they haven't got a clue what they're doing, and it isn't safe in our environment. So that's our challenge, and we will get there on time.
The other thing that's characteristic about entrepreneurs is that they recognise that, and there's a great quote, that perfection is the enemy of progress. And I guess what that means is that to spend all of the time dotting the I's, crossing the T's, having all of your ducks lined up, and having everything perfectly delivered, that by the time you get to market, someone else is coming and taking the market share. And entrepreneurs are amazing at just getting out there and getting it done and being able to make a difference and add value. Whereas nurses feel like, and career employees feel like, if they can't deliver the absolute best, then it's not worth delivering. They shouldn't. They have no purpose being there. It's almost that, if you're not the winner, the second place is the first loser, and nothing else counts. But from your point of view, when you've delivered a product or a service that maybe wasn't the best that it could be, that it changed over iterations of time, but you still added value.
Well, I guess I can look at one of my major competitors, right? A lot of front, a lot of bells and whistles, but in underneath, not a lot of substance. We focus on making sure that what we deliver in our education programs is done by people with a lot of credibility. We provide value add with the materials that we provide. Sometimes it doesn't go according to plan, and there are hitches and glitches. We always make sure that we evaluate what we're doing and take the knocks and the criticism on the chin and make sure that we improve as we go along. Remains to be seen how the competitive market behaves as far as this is concerned, but the research that you're doing behind is indicating that you just have to wait. You just have to wait and see. So it's a work in progress. I don't think that sort of thing ever stops, but that doesn't mean you stop. You keep on with the formula that you've got, and things will work out. They will. They'll work out. As the customer will decide.
And how about for you, Linda, a time where it wasn't perfect, but it still you were making a difference?
Well, I suppose if we go back to the beginning of the business, when we first started providing services, there was certainly an element of winging it, and I would say that with responsibility. So we didn't just go out with no care or processes or anything, but we've certainly refined them as time goes on. And that's what experience does. It just gives you more information to be able to preempt what you need to do or the information you need to get before you start with the next client, but it also refines your care for the other clients. So I'd say just the journey over 5 years, we've certainly refined our general process or procedures, and that's by using our team members. When I was nursing, it was always energised by the case management philosophy when we were in good clinical roles, and they really supported or encouraged case management, and I really take that role on with our clients. So we've got some very complex clients, and we work very closely with the extended health professionals. Many a meeting can be had in a cafe. You don't mention the name because we know the client we're talking about, but we're actually having a very collaborative conversation about how to refine the care for that individual. So our general services are refined, but then we personalise it for each individual by that sort of method, and that's what we know makes it that personalised care, which is what's the real value to each individual, because every single one of them is different regardless of diagnosis, similarity or prognosis. There's always an element of difference, and if you can tailor that little bit to them, then that's you just hit gold, because that's what they value.
Absolutely. And that leads on to the concept that the mistakes are part of the learning. learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And that's, you take an analogy from software developers, they started with the beta and then they worked through their iterations till they've got a completed product. And so it's the same really in what you've done. Nurses carry their mistakes with the weight of the world, and it breaks their heart, and they really feel it's a personal failure. But for you as entrepreneurs, they're just another iteration to get to better health. Yeah, isn't it? Have you got a time where you can think of where that added value to your business?
Remember, we're in the community, so we have people in their own homes. So probably the best example that I can provide is how we used to manage natural disaster or extreme weather events. So we've got clients from, as you said, Noosa to Brisbane, spread out everywhere. And when a extreme weather event's coming, we can't guarantee, one, that we can get to them because there's often been trees down, there's roads blocked, staff need to be able to get there and they just physically can't sometimes by the environment. But we even had, at one point, just a couple of years ago, all communications down in the Reception Bay area, and we had two very vulnerable clients that they couldn't get us on the phone and we couldn't get them. Huge learning, the be all and the end all for me is our clients are safe and not vulnerable, and that means all levels of safety, as in emotional security, etc. So this was a very bad experience for me because this was just not good enough.
Yeah.
Having said that, the weather does these things, Mother Nature does these things, and we can't control them. But nevertheless, if our clients are vulnerable, then I'm in an unhappy state. So we've learned from that and refined that, and we have strict procedures now where 48 hours, thank goodness we always hear about, most of the time, we hear about the weather warnings. So we start our communication with the clients 48 hours beforehand. We hear this is happening, we've got the script. So we send that out to the clients, we send that out to our staff, so everyone starts planning. Have they got the essential stuff they need? Have they, as in torches, battery operated radio, so they can stay in contact? Can you imagine if our immobile clients who are confined to a wheelchair or confined to bed, the power goes out, they are completely in the dark, as in no means of communication, no nothing.
Yeah.
So we've got a procedure to make sure that all of those really essential things are in the house and within reach for them. And we, if they're really vulnerable, then we make sure that they've got a family member or a friend who's close by who can go and help if we've got the tree or the flooded water in the way. And that has just, we've got so much feedback from the clients. So it's the open communication in the lead up, and we've just been able to manage those situations and keep our very potentially vulnerable clients safe and reassured, even as the world goes a little bit crazy around them.
So you almost needed that to happen to flesh that out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's some things you don't learn unless it's gone almost wrong. I love near misses. I don't know any instance, but I love near misses. They are awesome.
How about you, Mary?
Well, I don't have those kind of urgent pressures in the business that I do, but things do go wrong. So I can understand the anxiety that's been there when it's people that you're dealing with and you have to provide something straight away. But if you want an example from what I do in my business, it's running a 2-day conference down at the convention centre, speakers from EDs and ICU and all the rest of it. And one of them didn't turn up, got the wrong day. Place full of people, didn't know he wasn't going to turn up. No communication whatsoever. I mean, it's not a life and death. It's just a conference. But fortunately, the director of emergency from Gold Coast University Hospital was the next speaker, and this thing was on burns, and he'd just done a mortality and morbidity review at the hospital about a fellow who exfoliated himself. So that was a rescue that I was really grateful for. But so it's not fortunately, it's sort of what I do now takes you a step away from that kind of crisis. So there's really no crisis is it as important as those that you face with your patients that you're delivering care with. So didn't add value? Did it add value? Well, it did, because people were really interested in what actually happened. They heard about it in in the news, and there they were actually getting the mortality morbidity review on the actual case. They did get something out of that. Yes, and I got a big sigh of relief, so that's great.
One of the things that I think nurses and career employees have very strongly in common with entrepreneurs is that fundamental sense of discipline. The nurses are the most disciplined people that I think I'll ever be exposed to in terms of this profession. And it takes enormous discipline and tenacity and self-restraint and to build a business. So what's the most important thing that for the discipline that you've drawn on that you had as a nurse, what can you do for your patients as a business owner that you couldn't or didn't do as when you were a career employee?
Just because of the different environment, you really provide that personalised value to them. So for all those reasons you've explained through this discussion, that's just not possible in a clinical environment. In the community, we're able to do that one-on-one. So we're able to find out what the value is for that individual, for each individual rather, and really hone in on that. So I think that's probably the key from my perspective.
And you married?
Well, I don't have direct patient contact anymore face to face. Certainly have over the telephones with telephone triage. So the things that I bring to that interaction is certainly drawn from my clinical knowledge, but also the adaptability to different circumstances that patients are actually in. The person who's ringing from Kununurra in Western Australia hasn't got a lot of choices when they're having an MI. Now the ambulance is 150 k's away. The turnaround time is enormous. So the need to think calmly and clearly to give them direction about what they can do and to help their lives is part and parcel of that.
So in summary, we've talked about the fact that entrepreneurs have a great capacity to see those changes and things like workload pressures as opportunities. And you will take mistakes as opportunities and accept that perfection is something that's reasonably unattainable and it's just one of many iterations. In summary, how would you suggest that moving forward, the career employee who is those characteristics that carries that burden might think differently about something like workload and carry, that after all the lessons that you've learned over the years?
I think be self-aware and challenge yourself when you know that you are pursuing perfectionism. So I go back to the point I said before, in an acute environment, that doesn't mean that you let go of safety and the high priority issues, but we can't all do everything and be everything that we want to be to everyone at every moment. So being realistic and challenging, being self-aware and challenging your own inner dialogue, because it's your own stuff. It's going to use another word because it is another word. It's your own stuff that's unhelpful to your health and really unhelpful to those around you. So let it go. Let go of the stuff that you don't need to. We've all had to. We are no doubt working just as hard, if not more, than we did as employees. In a different environment, and there's the dynamics different, etc. But the hard work doesn't go away. But I definitely need to let go of stuff. And yes, you've described me quite well, as flawed as that sounds. Hit the nail on the head on most of those. So yeah, I've got a perfectionist personality and it's challenged me for most of my life, but having my own business, I've just got to cut through it and just identify when I'm just being stupid.
Yeah.
So
I think
just draw the line.
A great point there about the fact that there are a lot of ways to solve this problem, and they can be enterprise marketing can solve workload problems, and they can be more broadly change reform in the healthcare that we're seeing. But ultimately, we don't have as an individual much control over any of those things. But you do exactly what you're saying about letting go of some of the stuff that you can and do the best you can, and provide safe, excellent care with the resources that we have.
Yep.
Yeah.
And get comfort in yourself that you're doing that. You are doing the best with what you've got, and let the rest go and don't follow it.
And you, Mary?
Exactly the same thing. When I was in that role in the hospital, the perfection was the goal, the aim, everything was focused around that. Safety first, good risk management, pay attention to those things, otherwise the whole thing will fall apart. But perfection, not real at all. It's not real in a hospital environment with the things that really don't matter. What does matter is that the patient is safe, you can give them what they need in a safe manner, and other things can be prioritised down the way. And certainly within business, it's the same formula. The problem is recognising one from the other,
Yes.
and letting go of what you can't do, and work harder than you did before. You take on the whole lot, and it sometimes takes someone else to say, "Hey, hang on, you can't do all of that," or perhaps you get some kind of health warning that says, that's too much, and being able to let go of things and prioritise what is really important. And, take pressure off a little. Haven't achieved it yet. Still trying.
I just want to thank you both so much for coming. I think it's really insightful for people to see the way in which other people and other brains think. We all have a way, preference for our way the brains think, and career employees and entrepreneurs are vastly different, and it does make up a really complete picture. And it's great to hear about nurse entrepreneurs. I love the fact that there are so many nurse entrepreneurs out there. It makes me feel like proud that we go out and we run our own businesses and practices and add great value for what patients can experience. It's incredibly insightful. And thank you both so much.